About to sign the divorce papers, she asked for one last night together. What she discovered changed everything. Anna stared at the divorce papers resting on the dining table. Her hands trembled as she traced her name on the dotted line where she would soon sign. Across from her, David sat silently, his jaw tight, his eyes cast downward. It was the culmination of months of tension, arguments, and an unbearable distance that neither could bridge. "I guess this is it," she whispered, breaking the silence. David glanced up but said nothing. His once kind eyes, the ones that used to light up every time they met hers, were clouded with sadness. They had been married for 8 years, but the last 2 had been a battlefield of misunderstandings, forgotten promises, and unmet expectations. Neither of them could quite pinpoint when the cracks had become fractures, but now the pieces seemed too shattered to mend. Anna took a deep breath and looked at him. "Before we do this, before we sign, I have one request." David's brow furrowed slightly. "What is it?" "Just one last night together," she said, her voice barely audible. David hesitated. "Anna, what's the point? We've been trying to fix this for months, and we—" "Please," she interrupted, her voice firmer now. "One night, let's spend it together, without the arguments, without the blame. Just us, for old time's sake." He sighed and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, one night." That evening, Anna prepared dinner, his favorite, roast chicken with garlic and rosemary. She hadn't cooked for him in months, not since the arguments had begun to erode the warmth in their home. She set the table with candles and the good china they had received as a wedding gift but rarely used. When David walked into the dining room, he paused. "You did all this?" "It's just dinner," she said with a small smile, but there was something vulnerable in her voice. They sat across from each other, eating mostly in silence. But as the evening wore on, the tension began to lift. They talked about things they hadn't discussed in years-old memories, dreams they once shared, even funny stories from the early days of their relationship. "I miss this," Anna admitted softly, staring at her glass of wine. David looked at her for a long moment. "I do too." After dinner, they moved to the living room. Anna put on an old playlist they had made together during their first year of marriage. The familiar tunes filled the space, tugging at memories long buried. "Dance with me," Anna said suddenly. David raised an eyebrow. "Anna, you know I'm terrible at dancing." "Come on," she insisted, pulling him to his feet. Reluctantly, he placed his hands on her waist, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. They swayed awkwardly at first, but soon, the music carried them back to a time when things were simpler, happier. For a moment, it felt as though nothing had changed. Later that night, as they sat together on the couch, Anna asked the question she had been avoiding for months. "David, do you still love me?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Anna, I don't know if love is enough anymore. We've hurt each other so much." Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. "I know we've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But I keep wondering if we gave up too soon. If we stopped fighting for us when we still had something worth saving." David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I don't know, Anna. Maybe we did. But it's hard to see a way back when we've been so lost." That night, they slept in the same bed for the first time in months. Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything they had been through, the good, the bad, and the moments in between. In the morning, she woke to find David sitting at the edge of the bed, holding the divorce papers. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. He looked at her, his eyes softer than they had been in a long time. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about giving up too soon." He paused. "Maybe we owe it to ourselves to try one last time." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "You mean that?" He nodded. "But it's not going to be easy. We'll have to work at it, both of us." Tears filled her eyes, and she sat up, taking his hand in hers. "I'm willing to try. I don't want to give up on us." In the weeks that followed, Anna and David began to rebuild their relationship piece by piece. They went to couples therapy, something they had resisted for years. They learned to communicate better, to listen without defensiveness, and to express their needs without resentment. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when they stumbled. But for the first time in years, they were fighting for each other instead of against each other. One evening, months later, they sat on the couch together, laughing over an old photo album. David looked at Anna and said, "I'm glad we didn't sign those papers." She smiled, her heart full. "Me too." As they held each other, Anna realized that what she had discovered that night wasn't just that they still loved. each other. It was that love, when nurtured with care and effort, could be rediscovered even after it had seemed lost. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was worth fighting for. This story captures the journey of rediscovery, love, and the hard work it takes to rebuild what seemed broken. Let me know if you'd like to expand or adjust any part.